Hello, my friends. What's up? Michael here. I'm just recording a very quick message to let you know that I'm taking a brief hiatus from the podcast. I'm just taking a quick break for the rest of summer because I'm going to focus on reopening Mark Fisher Fitness. We reopened in New York City, and I want to focus on that for the next few months. So I'm going to practice what I preach and put this project on the back burner just briefly. And while I'm taking a break from the podcast, it's going to continue. So Mark Fisher and Pete Dupuis and friends that they invite are going to continue having conversations on the podcast for the next several episodes until I'm back at the end of summer. So enjoy the episodes while I'm gone. I hope you don't miss me too much. I know I'll miss you, but enjoy these episodes and have a great summer. Bye.
Hello, audience, and welcome to a bonus episode of the Business Unicorns podcast. As I think you've read by now in the emails, Mr. Keeler is taking a little bit of time away from the podcast, and he has left it in the, I hope you find capable hands of me. And to that end, instead of the bonus Mark and Keeler episode, it's now the Mark and Pete episode. Pete, how the hell are you doing?
Not just one. I think we got a couple on the books. So
yeah, we got a couple on the books here. So yeah, it's going to be a summer of Mark and Pete sharing thoughts, sharing hopefully actionable tips and strategies so you can have more success with your fitness business.
Yeah, I'm not Michael by any means, but going to bring some new flavor, right?
Indeed. Well, speaking of new flavor, today's topic is one that we hope you'll find interesting and I think can be relevant to training gym owners. And I will also say this is a topic that is relevant to many people who follow our podcast and even many of our coaching clients in the Unicorn Society, and that is public speaking. Now, it's interesting because twice in the past 7 days, 2 of our Unicorn Society coaching group members have asked for my help and support in putting together talks and giving presentations. This is obviously something that Pete and I do pretty regularly, though in the past year, for obvious reasons, it's mostly been virtual. But our thought today is we can give you some thoughts on some things we've seen to work well when it comes to giving effective talks that are either looking to grow your brand, either as just for the purpose of growing your training gym, or if you have a personal brand. I know many of our listeners also do business coaching or aspire to maybe sell products or coaching to other fitness professionals. And we can also share some things we've seen work not so well. So Pete, what comes to mind first? What's one thing you would give our listeners to be thoughtful about being effective with public speaking?
First thing that comes to mind for me is there is no such thing as too much preparation. That's been my experience to date. Well, first off, no ums. I've been doing that a little bit more than I'd like lately. I've lost my public speaking touch for sure without having stepped on a legitimate stage in the last several months. But for me, this has been about observing the people who I see to be the best in my kind of immediate network, and then also going so far as to review extraordinarily popular TED Talks and asking myself what's made them click and what makes them work, and then kind of condensing all of those lessons down into a single place and asking how I'm going to apply it to my own messaging. But since 2015, when I believe it was that I gave my first lecture, I can't seem to dodge the bullet of having to speak either before or after you at 8 out of every 10 events I'd say that I go to. And that's part of the reason why we're here today and working together in general, that we've had the opportunity to interact in those platforms. But
Sure.
I've been watching you lecture since I started, and I've been cherry picking the things that I think I can recreate or emulate from you, and then very quickly coming to terms with who I am not and what I'm not going to pretend to be on stage, because I think authenticity is very important in this context. And I can't step up to a microphone and tell the same jokes you do and expect them to click the way you do. So I guess that's a very long-winded way of saying preparation matters, and you got to be sourcing your tips and pointers from a pretty broad spectrum of presentation styles and approaches.
Yeah, it really is an art and it is a science. And I just want to highlight the point about preparation, because one of the most common, I guess I'll call it mistakes. One of the most common mistakes that I've seen is people not preparing properly. And this was a thing that didn't occur to me when I first started speaking, because I had a prior life as a professional actor. So with all due respect for other people on the speaking tour, there is a certain advantage one has when for 10 plus years, I made my living speaking on a stage, usually 8 times a week when I was in a show. I went to school for 4 years, got my undergraduate degree studying classical acting. And I guess not classical acting, it was musical theater, but it was a rigorous acting program at that. And one thing that I think is, my suspicion is this, I'm curious for your thoughts on this, Pete, that in fact, this might be a situation where people are convincing themselves that they don't need to practice as a form of fear of thinking about speaking in front of people. Maybe they don't enjoy the process of preparation. But I've had a number of conversations with individuals that, to my shock, have explicitly not done their talk out loud. They have not practiced saying the talk out loud. So for context, I'm not saying your process needs to be mine, but if I'm working on a new hour-long talk, I usually need 20 to 40 hours of time on it, because I'm gonna need a couple hours just outlining it, building out the slides, and then I wanna do it full out, speaking at the volume I will speak at in the talk, with the pacing that I'm going to give in the talk, because I also want to practice it, because invariably it's too long when I start. I always have to kill my darlings. And I like to do that if it's a new talk at least 5 times. I need at least full out 5 times. And ideally more, depending on how high stakes the talk is, because if it's a talk I'm a lot more nervous about, I spend more time on it. And I've noticed, I think some individuals go the opposite way. And my wondering, and I wonder if you've thought on this, Pete, is it that, do people just not know that you need to practice? Or are they afraid and daunted by this thing coming up, and they somehow convince themselves that the better way to do it is just get in flow and just let the gods speak through them?
I think that people have a bad habit of falling back on the advice, if you talk about what you know, you can't be wrong. And so there are some lecturers that I've seen who I believe lean too heavily on that. This is my lane. I know this inside and out. I'm going to go up there and I'm going to smash it, because there's no such thing as preparation when you live your preparation, that kind of mindset. But probably best if I explain my approach, because it's a little different from yours. I would imagine that ultimately hours spent end up accumulating very similarly, but I struggle to deliver a 60-minute presentation for myself behind closed doors, start to finish, in preparation. So what I do is I compartmentalize my presentations, and I'm pretty big believer of the rule of 3s as it relates to the amount of information I'm delivering, what's going on slides, how I'm structuring it. So for me, a presentation, a lecture is typically an introduction, talking about what I'm going to talk about. It's 3 sections, and then it's a kind of conclusion where it is, here's what I talked about, here are 3 action items that you can put into play right now, and here's where you can find me. And so if that's a 5-part presentation, ultimately, I try and start somewhere between 6 and 10 weeks out in my design, and I only design it a section at a time, and then I master the section. And the way that I do that is I prepare my slides, and then that might be only 5, 6, 7 slides for a given section, but I practice it driving to and from work out loud in my car for a whole week. And so I don't just want to know roughly what I'm going to say. I know exactly what I'm going to say. I almost memorize 60 minutes of lines by the time I arrive, but I break them down. So week 1, I actually will master the art of delivering my introduction. And so it doesn't mean that I don't have room to pivot or, deviate from my script, because there isn't really a script. There's just a series of 20-minute commutes where I experiment with it. And what I usually do is modify it over the course of the week. And then I just put it aside and I go on to the next section. And so that doesn't mean in the next commute, week 2, I'm delivering my introduction and part 1. It means I'm just going right into part 1. Because I find that once I memorize it and I commit it to memory and I lock it in, moving on to the next section doesn't mean I forgot where I was.
Sure.
It just means I can come back. And then from a start to finish delivery, we really lean hard on our in-services in-house here for cleaning up lectures. So if staff is going off-site to deliver a presentation, which is pretty common in normal times, they will reserve the right to deliver that to the entire team as an opportunity to educate and have a staff in service. If it is something that's a little redundant in relation to what we've been covering as a team, or it's maybe too elementary for the full-timers to be carving out an extra of their day to show up, I'll offer it to the intern saying, I'm going to be doing this on this morning at this time. I'd love it if a handful of you would show, and they all show up because one, it's an opportunity to learn, and two, it's an opportunity to look like you're engaged when you're talking to the boss and he said he's going to be doing this thing. Maybe you can show up early and show some initiative. And I typically preface those lectures with the request that they be brutally honest. And I'm not afraid to let them jump in midstream, because one thing I've been very fortunate with is I have figured out my pacing as far as the length of, say, a slide deck, or the length of, or the volume of content I prepare. And so I don't have a lot of issue with nailing that 45 to 55 minute window of material kind of just by feel. So I'll let people step in midstream and just smash. They can tell me that there are too many words on a slide. They can tell me they don't like a visual. They can tell me that I'm not speaking loud enough. There are a number of different things. But I guess when I say it out loud, I probably do somewhere between 20 and 40 hours of prep for each lecture, but I compartmentalize it so specifically that I'm not doing it the exact same way you do. I'm just getting there in a different path.
Yeah, I think the chunking approach is highly valuable. I think anytime you're trying to do, skill acquisition in general, but certainly even if you consider, if you're in a play, for instance, or many listeners that had a prior career as actors, you don't rehearse the whole. I think an important distinction is, while I do find value in running the full thing as I've worked through it, I guess it's true at the beginning I don't do that, right? Because if you're running a play, it's not like you just keep rehearsing the whole play, the whole thing through from day one. You're working on specific chunks of it. And part of it is because, depending on how much time you have, you need to go slow and work through the bits. So I think chunking is a very important strategy. I think it's interesting. One thing I want to highlight that you said that I think is an important thing that I would strongly recommend people do, is really work the hell out of and memorize your intro and your ending. People remember most how you began and how you ended. A speaking coach of mine once said, I thought this was very true, people remember what they see first and they'll remember what they feel last. So one thing that I found valuable, particularly if I'm going into a space where I feel nervous, a lot of my work, a lot of the speaking I do, obviously I speak to ninjas a lot, obviously I speak in the fitness industry a lot, and I haven't been doing as much recently, in part because we pivoted Business for Unicorns all in on training gyms, but for a while I was doing a fair amount of speaking in kind of random other corporate settings, and I always found it very, very scary. It was very scary for me. So what I know about myself and in general about nerves is the more I had that first, at least 5 minutes, super unlock, I could speak a little bit more extemporaneously once I get through that part. But in practice, one thing that I'll tell you for sure, I don't know offhand, even though my sense is not that I memorize exactly word for word, I rehearsed it enough that I'm pretty sure I'm going to say I've rehearsed the jokes. I know where the jokes are going to fall. I become very comfortable with like the timing of clicking on the slide, particularly if there is some kind of joke involved. And I think that level of practice, which can be done different ways, doesn't ever result that I've seen, and maybe you have counterexamples, of somebody looking over-prepared. Because I think in theory, that would be possible. In theory, sure, I could see maybe this is a belief we can break. Some individuals might feel, yeah, but I don't want to be too stilted. I want to be able to get in flow. And I've never seen that happen. So Pete, I know sounds like you virtually memorized your talks. I've never felt like, oh, Pete is so over-prepared. He's just like a robot up there. Like, I don't think that's a realistic concern if anybody's nervous about that. And one other point I will make that I think makes this challenging for individuals, when, particularly if they go to fitness conferences and they see some people on the tour, is there are a couple freaks. There are a couple freaks up there that can just get up, and I say this with love, ramble. They just get up and they ramble. They kind of have slides. They didn't put a lot of thought into it. And they're just so lovable. They're so lovable and so smart and so charming and so funny. that you don't really mind. Now, if I were to be a hypercritical asshole, I would say probably everybody would benefit from putting a little bit more work into it. But the reality is there are some people I have seen on the fitness industry speaking tour. They're just so damn good. I don't care. They're just so damn good and so lovable. I'm like, they're great, right? Whereas my beloved listener, that's likely not you. I love you so much. And maybe it is. And maybe if you know you consistently get feedback about being this unbelievably charismatic, energetic, dynamic personality that knows how to enrapture and enroll a room with your dynamism, with your understanding of pacing, okay, well, maybe you can just get up there and go and flow. But most often, that's, I don't think, going to be the case.
I think you actually nailed it in your description of when I say memorize, I get the start and the close down pat to a T. And I'd say that I like to get myself 85% of the way there for the middle section that you referred to as somewhat extemporaneous. And so that's probably a more honest way of describing my approach. But I am almost word for word delivering the first 3 minutes and the last 3 minutes of that presentation as I rehearsed dozens upon dozens of times. And it's more for my own sanity and comfort level coming in than anything. And I think it plays well, but I'm happy to hear that you've never thought like, oh, Pete sounds super scripted here, because I don't know that there's anyone who's heard me speak publicly more than you probably singularly. So that's valuable insight. I do want to share one piece of information, kind of learning experience from you that I got. I tell people all the time, I tell colleagues, employees, interns, when we start talking about this public speaking piece, that the reason that you tend to outperform your peers in this space is because of your pre-fitness industry experience. And I say, listen, Mark performs his lectures and the rest of us deliver them. And that's something that people should appreciate, that there is a performance dynamic. I mean, you're there to entertain people as much as you are to educate them. They're typically in our space, they're giving up their weekend for this. And so not many people want to give up their weekend willingly to feel like they're in a classroom where they've got a textbook and they're just taking notes, or at least that's not how I attend these things. And so that's what I value about your presentations. And when I think about maybe the first time, well, one of the first handful of times I presented with you, you opened the Motivation and Movement Lab you guys did at a really cool venue where it felt like it was a TED Talk. It was, there was maybe 100 to 150 people in the room. The room was really dark. There was a spotlight on us at the front of the stage. It was super cool. And I just remember before you said anything else, you said, good morning to everybody. You actually shouted good morning at us. And you said, if it feels like I'm yelling at you, it's because I am, and you will get used to it. And I remember thinking to myself, like, whoa, this feels like it could be a train wreck. And 30 seconds later, I was so comfortably being shouted at that I realized I probably need to project a little bit more effectively when I get in front of the room. And I probably way overdid it when I got up to speak 2 or 3 lecture slots later that day. But it has stuck with me since 2016 or whatever it was that happened. And it was a really good lesson. So I don't know if you remember doing it, but I remember it crystal clear.
That's interesting, because that is usually symptomatic of, that's actually good feedback, although we haven't used that space in a while, because usually that line I will pull out when we are not giving adequate sound. And I think the joke is quite literally, it sounds like I'm yelling at you and I'm mad at you, but in fact, I quite like you. I just want you to be able to hear me. And that is often a joke I will do when I'm purposely deciding I'm really going to push up the volume, because the room is like a dead room and people are not going to be able to hear me unless I'm speaking very loudly. And quite literally, I do want to explicitly say, it sounds like I'm yelling and I'm not. I think you're great. I feel lucky to have you here, but I have to speak with volume because some of you are in the back and this is a carpeted room.
I interpreted it differently. I mean, there's a good lesson there. That your intent might not be the way the audience receives it. And in my case, you were the first out of the gate, and I felt like you were setting a standard. It was first presentation of what was going to be 2 days worth of material, felt like, all right, this is the way this is going to go. There's a certain degree, we got to commit to this. You can't mail it in here. Mark showed up with a plan. I already learned a lesson. Let's go. And so I guess we all have different ways of consuming other people's approach.
Yeah, that's very true too. And I think your point is also well taken. I think another thing, again, for people listening is I think there's a little of a tension between, on the one hand, the most important thing is to be authentic and not be pretending to be anything. But on the other hand, acknowledging, to your point, that it's like any piece of content, right? Content ideally is informational, it's inspirational, and it's enjoyable. And so ideally, you're looking to entertain, you're looking to teach, and if possible, give some emotion, right? And frankly, when one is giving a talk, and I think it's easier for most speakers, I think your bare minimum ideally is giving some information. And some people, I think, have more or less aptitude, quite frankly, about actually inspiring people and transferring emotion in a meaningful way. And some people have more or less aptitude at comedy. Some people are just better at making people laugh and being entertaining and really taking people on a journey. And if you can do all three, that's amazing. And not everybody is wired that way. I will say, one thing I personally value when I go to see talks is, if I have to choose, interestingly enough, this might surprise people to hear, I'm okay if we just get good information. What I'm not as excited about is the person that's spending an hour trying to inspire me. Now, I think there's a time and a place for that. I think there are some people that are very adept at doing that. But as for my own taste, and this certainly is not to say this is what you need to do, but I personally, when I'm going to talks, the value I'm looking for generally is some kind of education. So if it's purely inspiration, that for me is admittedly not as exciting. That's not as exciting for me.
It's a little presumptuous to assume that we're all inspired by the same thing. So
that's also true too. And admittedly, I've been in a number of talks in my life where I'm like, wow, everyone is really into this, and I am not into this. This seems interesting. There's people around me crying. This is like a standing ovation moment, and I am unmoved. This just does not speak to me, and I'm not yucking the yum of the individuals around me. I'm thrilled. This seems like this is really working for them. And I would note, there are people that feel the same about me, quite frankly. I generally get pretty good reviews when I talk. It's true. I'm aware I've got a pretty good reputation. And there are definitely people that I'm just not their cup of tea. I'm just not to their taste. And it's too performance-y. It's too over-the-top-y. They prefer a little bit reserved, particularly in the fitness space, where you're not dealing with oftentimes very gregarious, out there, overstated people. Not to say the industry trends towards introversion, but quite frankly, the circles that you and I run in, quite frankly, which tend to be a little bit more, I mean this as a compliment, like nerdy, strength conditioning, very serious about the fitness, like got their spreadsheets, want to be professional, tend to be a little bit more understated. I think, maybe that's a little bit less of a sore thumb in other corners of the industry. And I say this again, it's not a judgment or negative thing, but like exercise, there's other corners of the industry where having a big personality is a prerequisite. And it happens to be you and I were both raised in a specific corner of the industry that is not known for being completely theatrical and over the top.
Yeah, well, it was refreshing when you brought it to the space. And when we started talking, there wasn't this influx of business talk. There was a very small handful.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I remember it was almost like a refreshing side of the fitness summit back in the day, when Nick Bromberg and Lou Schuler basically said, let's mix a little bit of this business thing in. It might be refreshing. Yeah. And we got kind of a free pass because it was to people. They were like, I just haven't heard this stuff. Who's Mark? Who's Pete? Who's Saul Orwell? Like all these things that we're hitting. It was fun because we were new, and it didn't really matter if you were so far off the reservation as far as your approach in relation to everybody else who was going. I think everybody was like, oh, this is awesome, new, finally something different. Yeah. I didn't go that route because I'm not comfortable being the gregarious joke teller, and I was terrified when I stepped in front of those rooms. You want to talk about discomfort in front of an audience? The first handful was like full-blown anxiety attack type lectures. And I think for your audience, it's pretty refreshing for them to hear that you step in front of a room uncomfortable sometimes. That's an important piece for people.
Yeah, and again, I won't lie, it doesn't feel that way often particularly I think the place where I feel most comfortable is when it is a friend of mine is running the event. when the producer is a close personal friend that I hang out with on a regular basis, that feels the most comfortable. When it's a larger, more professional organization, I feel less comfortable. And then when it's outside the fitness space and there's people in suits, I'm usually pretty scared. I'm usually pretty intimidated. That's okay. And I'm comfortable with that. And I think I have probably an ongoing internal dialogue about how much of that is valuable. And part of my own growth and development is putting myself in situations where I feel uncomfortable and have to learn how to navigate that. But on the other hand, also being honest about, well, how do I want to spend my time, my brief and wild and precious life? Do I want to do things that I don't want to do, that I don't like? Because the other piece of this too, by way of maybe close this up and give some more takeaways for individuals, are one thing that is interesting is a lot of people are drawn to speaking. And one thing I would ask you is, what is the outcome for you? I think for some individuals, the outcome is, and this isn't wrong, but I think it's status. They want it for status. Whereas in theory, speaking is about treasure, right? Not saying that you're a mercenary or you're only doing this to make money, or that it's wrong to give a talk purely because it's fun and you want to share information. And for many, many years, Business for Unicorns is not that old. I was speaking for several years before I had anything that anybody could buy because I wanted to do it. But in my head, I figured, okay, at some point, maybe I can have some sort of consulting, coaching opportunity here. And in the meantime, let me just add value, figure out what is people need, talk to people, get the lay of the land. And I would encourage individuals that are interested in speaking to think through that as well, because speaking is a thing I think a lot of people are drawn to because it sounds cool and it's fun, and it is, and that's true. And you only have so many weekends in the year, and your business needs a lot of your attention, and you probably have family and loved ones that also need your attention. So I think really being strategic about if and how this is moving the ball forward, or alternatively not, and just being honest with yourself, this is essentially a fun hobby that's taking away attention and energy from my business and my family and other things. There's nothing wrong with doing it because you just think it's fun and it's inspiring you. But I would encourage you, if you're listening, this is something you want to get into, whether it be certainly for the fitness industry, but even if you're doing events for your training gym, right? Because if you're doing lectures, lunch and learns, workshops, speaking to the Chamber of Commerce, if you're looking for opportunities to talk about your fitness for your gym, frankly, that's a little bit easier because it's a little bit more obvious. Those gigs, oftentimes, you're not going to get paid for, and you would pay for the opportunity because it's marketing. But I do just want to put that on your radar if you're somebody that aspires to speak on the tour. I love it. It's a very important part of my life. I feel like I have this whole other set of coworkers that admittedly this last year excluded. It's like, oh, these other coworkers that I see, every month I'll see Tony Jean-Decor somewhere in the world. And I do miss all of that. And I think you also just want to consider, it's just so cliche, go back to what is your vision for your life in 5 years? And that is both qualitative, what are you spending your time doing, who are you working with, what is filling you up, what is lighting you up, and quantitative, where is your personal take-home income coming from, and what are the revenue streams that's coming from? And then from there, figuring out, okay, well, how do I want to spend my time in the next 3 to 12 months?
Beyond that, I will also say, why does this matter to you? Even if you don't want to hit the road, hit the circuit the way you're talking about, the foundational principles of good public speaking are immensely valuable for just about every strength coach on the planet. Gosh, and sure. So I would love for all of our interns to listen to conversations like this, because there are times where we put them in front of 15 kids who are 13 years old or younger, and they need to command the room. And so some of the most valuable takeaways I've taken from these opportunities to speak publicly have manifested themselves into showing well in front of my kids' little league, like the entire league, step up and talk to them about something, address a team, address a community. If you can even just MC an event, you need these skills. And so there's so much more to it than feeling like I came out of a big seminar weekend and I killed it. For me, right. It's like I can comfortably grab the microphone when we host a open house for kids and their parents and not have a full-blown panic attack when I realize I need to set the stage for what we're going to do that night and just articulate my thoughts in a group setting. So this matters to everyone, whether you're going to put a microphone on your lapel and collect a paycheck for it, or you are just going to command a room of athletes, clients, interns, whatever. So the skills have just made me a better leader, to be honest. I'm better at driving people in a direction I would like ever since I've been able to step up in front of a room in Kansas City in a panicked format and crank through what was probably 2.5 times as many slides as I needed.
Yeah, no, it is such a great point that being able to verbally communicate your thoughts in a cohesive, compelling, and clearly understandable way is one of those master skills. In my extended, what I love to refer to as my extended Brooklyn Burning Man entrepreneurial community, one of my jokes, which is true, is this is a crew of largely very, very successful people. And my joke / not joke observation is there is an unusually high percentage of potential cult leaders, an unusually high percentage of attractive people that are comfortable with a large room looking at them and creating a group flow experience through their words, through their body language, and dropping everyone in together. Admittedly, the community at large is cultish in a way I actually quite like. I mean, this is a compliment because people are so down to be like, oh, we'll all like drop in together and do very unusual Burning Man things together, which I won't tell you, podcast listeners. You'll have to email me. I'll tell you privately elsewhere. But yeah, I think that is a great point. And if I would give one other, this is my final pro tip for this, is if you are preparing a formal talk, one other thing I would offer you is identify what is the number one thing you want your audience to know. What is the number one takeaway? And I would even maybe chop it up further. What is the number one thing you want them to know, you want them to feel, and you want them to do? Because I think if you can identify that, you can then chunk back the rest of the speech to what is like the one big idea. And that obviously is going to really help you break down what are the bullet points, sim repeat. I think usually 3 is the way to go, particularly for an hour, 45-minute long talk. And then what is your intro? And then what is your closing? Because ideally, the audience, when they leave, ideally there's not that there can't be more takeaways, but there ideally wants to be one big thing that they got out of the talk that even if they're barely paying attention, they're not going to miss it that they leave with from that talk.
Yeah, give them closure. To me, there's nothing worse than the person who's 54 minutes in and they're like, oh shit, I've still got 17 slides. Well, let's crank through these real quick. And then they get 15 of those 17 slides done, and they're like, hey, looks like I'm out of time. Hope that was cool for you. Yeah. And the one thing you were talking about is just lost in the noise.
Yeah.
So the end is every bit as important as everything that came before it, because you need to revisit that one thing. But I love that. I'm not going to tell anyone anything more meaningful than that. Have your singular objective coming in.
Oh gosh, yeah, and do work that ending. I must confess, I have sometimes in my life farted on endings. Particularly, I think actually specifically even in team meetings, because a team meeting is another time to give a talk, right? So when I'm doing a quarterly State of the Union or something where it's an opportunity where ideally I'm not only clarifying, giving information, but ideally imbuing the team with some motion, some energy, some inspiration, some vision casting for here's where we're going, here's why this matters, here's why this matters to you personally, here's why this matters to the world, and then, all right, everybody, thank you. I think I've definitely ended talks crappily, so do make sure you end that as well. All right, friends, well, we will call this here time. Pete, are there any other final burning thoughts you want to share? I think we covered this pretty thoroughly.
No, we're going to bring it back in a couple weeks here, one more time before Michael's schedule frees up for sure, at least. And my thought would be, if you have feedback on it or you want to shoot us DMs, please do. Or if there's something in particular you'd like to see us cover the next time we hop on a miscellaneous call of this nature, I would love a DM. And I don't know if I've ever publicly said it on the podcast here, but my Business for Unicorns email is pete@businessforunicorns.com. And people are welcome to slide into my inbox DMs as they please.
Yes, please do. Please give us feedback, give us likes, give us ratings, give us comments on the Apple Pod and all those things. We like you a great deal, listeners. Hope you have an amazing day, and we'll see you on a podcast soon, or well, you'll hear us on a podcast soon.
Hey, friends, before you go, just one more thing. If you enjoy this podcast, you get value out of it, you enjoy listening, please share this podcast, comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe. Please share it with friends and family. We don't spend any money on marketing or advertising. And so the only way people find out about this podcast is from you. So please do everything you can to share it with friends and fellow colleagues in the fitness industry. We love making it and we want to keep doing it for a long, long time. So I appreciate your support. Go have a kick-ass day. Bye.